Good afternoon, or I guess good morning, depending upon what part of the United States you're in this morning. Welcome to what every call center needs to know about Stir Shaken and call analytics. I am very pleased to have a co-presenter here with me, Dean Garfinkel, who I'll introduce in a second. I'm Michele Shuster. I'm managing partner at the law firm of McMurray and Shuster. I'm also general counsel for PACE, the Professional Association for Customer Engagement. And this is a topic that's been at the center of many things that we've been doing recently. And I'm very pleased to have Dean on the line. Dean, why don't you give a little information about your background?
Sure, Michele. It's a pleasure to be here as well. Dean Garfinkel. I've been in technology and telecom for the better part of my career. A couple of patents, all telecom related. And a compliance expert as it relates to TCPA and TSR. Also co-owners of call center business and Quality Voice and Data, a telephone company.
And look, there's our beautiful pictures. I think we look better in our pictures, Dean. There might be a little touch up there. A little disclaimer, while we'll be talking about legal topics during this presentation, we are not giving legal advice. If you need legal advice, give me a call. I'm happy to talk to you about those types of things. The agenda for today is we're going to give an overview of Stir Shaken. We added a little bonus segment after Thursday with the release of the Facebook opinion. So we'll talk about that here for a minute before we get started, because I think that's interesting and obviously great breaking news. We'll then go into the basics of blocking and labeling and attestation ratings. We'll give you some FAQs, discuss some of the challenges, and then Dean and I will be available for questions. We've gotten some questions in advance that we'll start with. And so with that, let's go ahead and get started. So Facebook, Dean can attest to this too. Dean, I think we got involved with this issue probably for the first time back in 2012 when you were on the PACE board. And we had filed a request for reconsideration with the FCC around the elimination of the EBR exemption for placing certain types of telephone calls. And it seems funny that that's even an issue now that we look back to. But as part of that, we also asked the FCC to provide guidance on what an automated telephone dialing system was. And from there, it's been a long, strange journey. We ended up in the DC Circuit Court with the ACA case and most recently with the Supreme Court opinion. And so how we got in the Supreme Court is there was a case that was decided in the Ninth Circuit, Mark versus Crunch. I'm sure most of you are aware of this case. If you're on this phone call, you already know a lot about the industry. But in that case, the Ninth Circuit took a very broad approach to the definition of what constitutes an ATDS. And in simplest terms, it included predictive dialers as an ATDS and potentially other types of dialers too that just had the potential to predictively dial. And that became very problematic. We had a lot of class action lawsuits that were filed, and Facebook ultimately got caught up in this issue, and other circuits were also deciding how to define an ATDS, and it was in a way that was very, very expansive. And so the case was taken up by the Supreme Court, and PACE again got involved in this issue. And what Facebook was asking the Supreme Court to do was to take a look at the definition of ATDS and to take a look at the various court opinions across the United States, because when it accepted that, that was an important part of determining to take the Facebook appeal. We, as representatives of PACE, filed a brief in the Supreme Court case, and the reason we did is because what some of the arguments were on the plaintiff side in the Ninth Circuit is that the reason that there needed to be an expansive definition of the ATDS definition in the TCPA is because if you took the definition that Facebook was proposing, then it would mean that there were systems that were capable of randomly and sequentially generating a number, storing that number, and then dialing that number. And the Duguid defense team was arguing that back in that period of time, there were no dialers that were capable of doing that. And so we presented an amicus brief to the Supreme Court and showed that those types of dialers did indeed exist when the TCPA was written. And those were dialers that had the ability to randomly and sequentially generate numbers and then to store those before dialing them. So in addition to looking at the grammar involved in the definition of ATDS, and that is whether the term randomly and sequentially generate numbers apply to both store and produce telephone numbers, they looked at the brief that we filed. So we're kind of proud of that fact. And we're proud of the fact that that's one of the reasons that the Supreme Court looked at when they were deciding that the Ninth Circuit was wrong and the definition needed to be much, much narrower. And so what does that mean now? Now that we have the Supreme Court that has finally spoken, clear up the controversy in the circuits across the United States to limit the definition of ATDS to systems that are actually randomly and sequentially generating numbers and then dialing them. It doesn't mean that we could just crank up all of our dialers and start dialing and not worry about any other laws, because there's still a number that apply, including the do not call laws. And so you'll recall that if you don't have an existing business relationship for a telemarketing call, or if you don't have an existing business relationship or an inquiry existing business relationship, that you'll need to scrub against the do not call list. Also, pre-recorded messages are still something that is regulated by the TCPA. You need either prior express consent or prior express written consent, depending upon whether it's a telemarketing call or a transactional call. There's also state laws, and I suspect that we'll see an increase in state laws as folks are digesting the Facebook case. We're already seeing some state laws that were proposed at the beginning of the year around calls to cell phones. So I suspect we'll see greater regulation around that. And then also, you really need to pay attention to the consent forms that you use when you're collecting consent for things like do not call or pre-recorded messages, or even state laws, to make sure that those are getting you the type of consent that you want. So this is not the focus of this presentation. We'll be giving a much more detailed presentation on Thursday with PACE. So if you're interested in that, you can go to the PACE website to get details on it, and we'll be discussing the Facebook case. So with that, Dean, let's talk.
It was a good win. It was a good win, and a lot of it based on the hard work that you did in the ACA case and winning the appeal in the appellate court.
Yeah, we had lots of helpers, but thanks, Dean. I appreciate that, and I always appreciate all the support you provided. So, all right. So with that, let's talk a little bit about Shaken. So, Dean, do you want to give us a background, kind of the layman's terms for Stir Shaken?
Sure. So, and obviously most of the folks that are on this call have attended many webinars and are pretty much up to speed. But Shaken is a technical standard that all the phone carriers were requested to adopt by the FCC on the June of 2021 timeframe. Its initial design was to provide for traceback, so that the regulators, the FTC, for example, could trace back a call to its origin like right away. And so its design allowed them to do that. It calls for an originating telephone carrier. That would be the phone company that's actually carrying your traffic from your dialer, from your center, to insert a unique token that basically is the signature. When the call makes itself all the way through to the called party carrier, that's the person you're calling's carrier, they look at the token, they validate the token using a public key. In that token is the information as to who initiated the call. So we know that the call party carrier knows that the call was originated by, let's say, Quality Voice and Data, for example. And then based upon how the originating carrier signs that call, we'll determine what they're going to do with it. In theory, if it's, and we'll talk about this later, but if it's signed with a full attestation, maybe they'll just let it go through. Or if it's not signed with the C attestation, which means we don't know anybody or we don't know anything about this call, we may not. And then the most important thing that everyone should know is in the last report and order from the FCC, just I think it was last month, the deadline was not postponed. And there are some caveats to that, and we'll discuss that.
That's a great summary, Dean. And these are the attestation levels that Dean was just talking about. There's 3 levels to the stir shaken attestations. And the first is the A, or the full attestation. And this is the level that all carriers or that all call originators are really going to need to be able to obtain to make sure that their calls are getting through. And with an A attestation or full attestation level, basically your carrier is attesting to the fact that they know who you are, that know your customers, what this frequently is referred to, and they have confidence in the types of calls that you're placing, and as the FCC has been calling it lately, that you're not placing bad traffic, and that you have the right to use the caller identification information that you are using. And so both of those things are going to be required in order to get an A-level attestation. B level, not quite to that level. There's still the know your customer element to it. The originating carrier or voice service carrier knows who is placing the telephone call, but they don't have a confidence level in the caller ID that's being used. And Dean, there's a lot of different situations where that could happen. Why don't you give us some of those examples?
Well, so I just want to add, so obviously everyone on this call wants all their calls signed with an A, and A just means that the company that's signing the call, which has to be the originator of traffic. So that's important for everyone to understand. You can't have somebody in the middle that says, "Hey, I'm going to sign your calls for you," unless the originator of the traffic, they're the only ones who can sign the call. And they have to be authorized to sign the call. So they have to be an authorized shaken service provider, and they have to be the originator of traffic. They have to have a business relationship with their customer, like you said, and they have to know that you're allowed to use the phone numbers that you're using as caller ID, right?
That's a good point. I think people might be curious about this. This know your customer process that you and other call originators are engaging in. What does that look like? What are you doing when you're going through that know your customer process?
So the governing authority for shaken is basically saying they said, okay, you could be an authorized shaken provider if you meet the requirements, and you can sign these calls. But when we come to you, when a regulator comes to you, when the Traceback group comes to you, and they say, okay, this is a bad call and emanated from your network, you originated the call, who's your customer, who's your client? If we don't know that information to their satisfaction, then we lose our ability to sign calls. So we as a carrier are very concerned about it. What does it look like? It looks like a credit application, but it also includes an additional component, which is who the beneficial owners of the business are. Now, let me just say that every carrier can decide. So the governing authority for shaken does not turn around and said, this is what you need to have. They don't do that. They just said, we expect you to know your customer and be able to provide their information on demand. So we as a company, talking with other peers of ours, have all come up with pretty much the same thing. We want to know who the company is, where they were formed, when they were formed, what state they're formed in. We want all the basic credit, who they bank with, normal credit trade things. And then at the end of it, we want them to sign something that says they understand our acceptable use policy, meaning no pre-recorded calls, no fraudulent calls, and then who is the beneficial owners of the business. In our case, we accept a letter from a lawyer saying who they are. We accept a letter from the accounting firm saying who they are. Or a small business can use photo IDs that are government issued as part of that attestation. And of course, if they're a public company, then we don't necessarily need that. We just need their symbol because everything is already publicly filed with the SEC. It's not really a complicated process. We just need to know who the beneficial owners are, and we need to know who our business is and where they're located and what they're doing in high level. We're not listening to phone calls. We're not going that deep. It's just about the business.
yeah. So getting back to the question that, what types of calls are going to receive a partial attestation? I've heard of some pretty common scenarios about issues that can be raised that would lead to a partial attestation. What do some of those look like?
And on a latter slide, I'm going to get a little bit. I have a slide on enterprise, which I could touch on that. But
okay.
So if somebody if we're originating traffic for a customer and we're the provider of the phone numbers, then we're going to sign those as an A. If they use phone numbers that we did not provide, and they don't tell us they're going to use those numbers, then we're going to sign those with a B. However, if they come to us and say, I have all these numbers that my client, my the brand that I'm calling on behalf of has asked me to use, as it's in that's no problem. We just need a letter of authorization that says they're authorized to use the numbers, and then we'll sign them as an A. So for me, the biggest issue that carriers are going to, and again, this is up to each originating carrier to do what they want to do. And I'm going to go into it in more detail, but a B would mean that you're using a phone number that you didn't come and tell the originating carrier that you were going to use. So it's somebody making a call on a shaken route who did not tell the carrier, I'm using this number. And it's going to end up then with a B. I know the customer, but I don't know anything about the number. A C would mean we're an intermediate carrier. The call came to us unsigned. So we didn't originate the call, but it came unsigned. And so we're now going to sign it and drop it on the network with a C, meaning we don't know anything about the customer or the phone number.
I've heard that this is an issue that international callers will have with coming onto telephone networks through the international gateways. Is that something that you are seeing as an issue, or something that you are seeing that international callers are looking to address?
We're working with some international, some companies that are dialing into the States, and a lot of these companies are actually using, hosted dialers, UCAS in the cloud that actually are in the United States. And in these cases, again, if we are the originating carrier and we know the customer, we know they're authorized to use the number, we have no problem signing those calls. So, but if the call comes in and doesn't have a token in it, we're going to insert a token and we're going to give it a C.
And so, as far as the issue of making sure that calls get through to their intended recipients, one piece of that puzzle is going to be ensuring that your calls are getting the full level of attestation, but it's really not the end of the issue or the end of the discussion, because there's a whole nother layer of issues that calls can encounter through blocking and labeling through the carrier's analytics companies. And so we know that these have been being used for a number of years. I think probably starting about 3 years ago is when they fully came online, and we started to seeing a drop in call connection rates. But do you want to give us a little bit of background on what's happening on the blocking and labeling front, Dean?
Sure, it's actually expanding, not shrinking. So, and a lot of people thought that shaken was going to be the panacea and that was going to be it, but really that's not going to happen. So it's kind of interesting. Everyone said, well, okay, there's no way for all the telephone carrier networks to become shaken overnight. I mean, AT&T and Verizon have been around for a long, long, long time, have a lot of their network that supports, regional activity. And those networks are going to take years to update and upgrade. So they didn't think it was going to happen. But the FCC did rule in the last report order, we're not postponing this thing. And they said instead, all the carriers either are shaken on their network, or in the parts of the network that they're not shaken on, or if they meet the rural exemption, they still have to file a notice of what their robo mitigation plan is. And that robo mitigation plan in most cases is using call analytics, because you could drop call analytics on an old TDM network and it does the job, right? So while you're getting 100% of your network in place. So we're stuck with this combination where calls are going to be signed and shaken, and then on the other side of it, it's going to be call analytics. And so analytics are easy. They drop on the network. They use basically to determine if the traffic is transactional or dialer traffic or what it is. So they want to know, is it transactional? Is it annoying to our customers or consumer? These algorithms, these analytic companies use these algorithms that use a lot of data points. They're using, is there a CNAME stored? Is there, name and address stored, for example? How long has the number been out there? And then they're looking at other things, and they're looking at, is it shaken? Is it signed? The algorithms are looking at that, without a doubt. Every time I've talked to all the major analytic companies, and they're all, if there's a token in there, that's going to help the reputation immediately. But at the same time, they are looking at behavior of calling, such as velocity of dial and ALOC. And ALOC is probably one of the most important and biggest problems, and that stands for average length of call. So they look at a CID and they look at the average length of call for the calls being made on their network, and that is significant, and that's a big problem, because velocity, you could say, okay, hey, let's do snowshoeing, let's just add more phone numbers and divide the number of dials we make, and that by itself, can help, but it's not the whole thing. It's ALOC, it's average length of call. It's going to be a really big thing. Everyone has got to focus on. You need to clean up your calling and you call up your list. T-Mobile was the first carrier that dropped the analytics in and embedded it for free in their handsets. I think everybody knows that by now. Again, and we'll cover this a little bit more, that the mitigation plan is using analytics. And let me remind everybody again, the FCC did grant safe harbor to telephone carriers for blocking calls they think their subscribers do not want. So you got to make calls, you need them shaken. You need to be mindful of what analytics plays a role, what the role is of analytics. And those two are the only things that are going to impact your answer rate.
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting things is this concept of unwanted and using reasonable analytics. And I think that, this issue will continue for a long time. There's a call transparency website that's coming online to register telephone numbers and to assist with blocking and labeling issues. And I know that's something that we're going to be hearing much more from the carriers and the analytics companies in the next couple of months. I think we'll be having a webinar with Pace also to let them come on and discuss what their new call transparency platform will do. So stay tuned for that. Okay, and you've got some fun facts here, Dean.
So again, FCC last report and order, it did waive. It said, okay, it rejected the argument to push the June date out flatly. It said rural carriers that have less than 100,000 subscribers or less can have an additional year to become shaken, as long as they filed their robo mitigation plan with the FCC. I think all those plans have to be filed by the June 2021 deadline. So what that means is that anybody who is still saying that you don't need to be shaken by June is just wrong, and it means that you got to be ready on both fronts. So we need both tools in place. And let me just say that shaken is already in play. It's not like a June date. Calls are being signed. Other carriers have been signing calls for months. And just to put it out there today, as of like last week, we're probably signing calls. I know we're signing calls for over 500 carriers that are accepting the tokens. And they include Verizon Wireless, Verizon Business, AT&T, T-Mobile, Comcast, Cox, Cablevision, Lumen, Former CenturyLink. Now, it's not 100% of their networks, but it's a part of their networks. And the other part of the networks are using analytics, and the tokens are playing a role. So it's all this is converging every week. More and more carriers, more and more parts of carriers' networks are all being impacted. This is coming. It's coming fast, and everyone needs to get on board. Call analytics is very, very important. So this slide is really interesting. So if I call it shaken in the enterprise, but if you're a typical BPO, you're probably using more than, and you have a premise-based dialer, you're probably using more than one carrier, and you're doing it for multiple reasons, for diversity, for pricing, and so forth. And then if your dialer is cloud-based, you don't even know who the carrier necessarily is. So at the end of the day, whoever is signing the calls gets to decide what they're going to sign and what they're not going to sign. So some carriers, like our position is, we'll sign numbers that we provide. We'll also sign any number that a customer gives us an LOA for. So an LOA is a letter of authorization. So for example, let's say that my call center was making phone calls for Amazon, and Amazon said, we want you to use these 10 phone numbers for caller ID. We would get a letter from Amazon, from an Amazon.com email that says that this call center is authorized to use these 10 phone numbers. Based upon that letter, we would sign those as an A, no questions asked. Most of the carriers that we've been dealing with are exchanging LOAs, because we've given LOAs up to folks and people have given us LOAs. And it seems to be that's kind of the direction. What's critical about this, and what for people listening to us, is if you have more than one carrier, you have to make sure that all your carriers are on board to sign an A for all your numbers, regardless of where you're getting your numbers from. Because you could have carrier A could be your first route and give you phone numbers. And then you overflow to carrier B because there's a problem with carrier A, or maybe the B route's a little cheaper. Well, your B carrier that's signing your calls now has to know the phone numbers that the A carrier gave you, and they have to be prepared to sign those as an A as well. So basically it means that you have to manage the inventory of phone numbers you're using. You have to make sure that every carrier you use is aware of the numbers you're using and accepts your authorization and assigning them as an A, fully attesting. So you now have to manage something that you didn't have to manage before, and I believe it's the complexity of managing this that is what everybody here has to focus on, and that's the message of this slide. It's not practical to say I'm going to use one carrier and just their phone numbers. It's just not going to work, and you have to be mindful whether it's a premise-based dialer where you're buying your own circuits from your own carriers, or you're using something in the cloud and they're using multiple carriers as they do. They have to also make sure that all your phone numbers are going to be signed A by all those carriers. So that for me is the lesson here. I think everyone understands shaken, everyone understands analytics. This is going to be critical as you start to get your calls signed. So that's what I worry about, this piece.
Yeah. As we're talking about that, and we're talking about the analytics companies, and we're talking about requiring an A-level attestation. I mean, I haven't heard the analytics companies come right out and say it, but what are your thoughts on calls being able to get through analytics, so the call blocking without an A-level attestation? Do you think they automatically block it if it's not an A?
So definitely not right now. Definitely not right now, for sure. They're not going to block it just because it's not signed. But they are going to put a lot more weight on that data point when the algorithm makes its decision. And the reason why they're not going to flat out block it is because there's still going to be a lot of the network that's not shaken yet, and so they can't. But I think we'll get there a year from now, 100%. I think it'll get in that direction. In the meantime, if it is signed, and this is a question someone else asked, if I am signed and it's a attestation, are we good to go? No, you're not good to go. If the algorithm, even with the weight that it's giving that data point, thinks that it's a robocall, and I'm just using that, a call their consumer doesn't want or shouldn't be getting, they're going to look at blocking it. Now, the FCC did say that requiring carriers to inform the originating carriers that they're blocking these calls. So there is hope that towards the end of the year, and we're seeing it on some of the carriers now, where we're getting back different cause codes telling us the calls were potentially blocked. We're seeing it more and more, so that'll help with what we're doing.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That was something that we fought for a long time. That a cause code be given so that that callers know that those calls are being blocked. We thought it was really a critical component of what was happening on the stir shaken and on the blocking and labeling front. So we were glad to see that happen at the end of last year.
Right.
So So what's critical now, Dean, as folks are starting to realize that we're down to crunch time as far as understanding stir shaken and making sure that their calls will get through?
Find a telephone carrier who can start tokenizing your calls as soon as possible. Ensure that you have a good inventory of all the phone numbers you're using and a process in place, and have all the LOAs you need so that all the carriers you use are going to sign with an A. There's no excuse for them not to, unless you forget to tell them that you're going to be making a call using a number and providing them proof of authority to use the number. Outbound dialing strategy, talk with your teams. ALOC, average length of call, absolutely one of the most critical pieces that are being looked at by the algorithms. You need to get your arms around that. It means changing your dialing strategies. You got to do it. Second thing is get your numbers loaded. There are a few authentication hubs out there that are used. These authentication hubs are basically back-end engines that drive analytics. You can load numbers in there. So if we load numbers in there for our customers, we're shaken and these numbers are known and we know our customer and et cetera, then weight is given to those numbers to not block and label and ignore the decision of the algorithm. At the same time, monitoring is a benefit of these kind of platforms, to know how your numbers are scoring out there, so that if your reputation drops and we can see that in the scoring, and then we can replace those numbers or talk about the dialing strategy that needs to change in that market or that campaign. Those are critical things that one can do. It's really important to put a lot of emphasis in this work. The most important one of the first two bullets, as soon as possible. Move on that.
Yeah. Just an interesting element and a little bit of an aside from the stir shaken information that we've been talking about. I don't know if you've been seeing this as well, Dean, but there has been a huge uptick in regulatory activity in the last, I would say, probably 2 months. The Traceback has given the FCC some additional enforcement tools that they can use. We saw two judgments that came out of the FCC within the last couple of months, one for 12.5 and the other for $225 million. So significant damages and civil penalties that are coming out of those cases. We saw a group of cease and desist orders that have been issued, and the FTC, we know, has become much more active with the civil investigative demands it's issuing, and the states are issuing CIDs, or civil investigative demands, and subpoenas as well. So I think that, as well as preparing for stir shake, and I think now is time to be really extra vigilant with the types of calls that are being placed. And if you're a seller, what your vendors are doing on your behalf, because I really do think the regulators are getting ready to make a statement in connection with what's going on with stir shaken, with some type of sweep or series of enforcement actions as we lead up to the implementation of stir shaken. Also, the industry traceback group, which you mentioned, Dean, in one of the prior slides, is really become very active and central to what the regulators see as an answer to stopping what they call bad traffic or bad calls. And so the ITG, which I suspect most of you are aware of at this point as well, is the industry traceback group. It is the consortium that's been selected by the FCC to trace back calls that are being identified as problematic, everything from scam calls to pre-recorded messages, which I think has been a central focus for the ITG lately, to those type of calls that have an ALOC or that are leaving pre-recorded messages on answering machines that don't have the right disclosures, but just a whole myriad of issues that the ITG is looking to trace back those call originators. And so, voice service providers are being pulled into that. And the one thing I can tell you is that if you get an ITG request, it is so critical that you respond to that request to provide the information that's been requested. And if you're identifying as a voice service provider issues with the type of traffic that is being generated through your platforms, you've got to stop it immediately because that is most definitely the message that the FCC is getting out, that you have to know your customers, you have to understand the traffic, and you have to shut down any of those calls that you know that are potentially coming in. So with that, Dean, I think we have a series of questions that have been sent. And in the shuffle of computers, as we were hopping on this, I do not have that list of questions. So I'm hoping you can start us off.
I do.
Yeah.
I do, but I want to just add something to two things that I think are really critical. One is the ITG that you talked about, the Traceback group, right? So with Shaken, so they're now in a position where they can start tracing back traffic, and they will be more and more, and they're going to become way more aggressive. But the one thing that I wanted to point out about Shaken that we have seen, and I think this is really important. So the networks, and I don't want to call any carriers, but there's some carriers that have pretty much moved their entire network as IP. They are Shaken, and they've dropped analytics on these networks so they could see things they never could see before. And then we're getting calls back and saying, we're seeing this type of traffic coming from you from these particular numbers, and we don't really like this kind of traffic. And so basically, so we've got two routes. We've got the Shaken route that we can send calls on, and we've got the non-Shaken route we can send calls on. The non-Shaken route is going away. The Shaken route is very, very particular about what traffic is coming on that network, and we're getting pushback. And it's not even like you can blend the traffic. It's very specific. And so everyone has got to realize that with Shaken, the Traceback group's going to be more active, like you said, and carriers going to be more discriminating in the kind of traffic they're going to allow on their networks. And although, you know, we have a lot of VoIP carriers that deliver traffic, at the end of the day, they're going to the same, you know, 10 CLECs or the same, you know, same big boys that are being very discriminating. So I wanted to point that out. The game is going to change just naturally because of that, and that's what we're seeing out there. I have the questions. The first one someone had asked was timing of a rollout for Shaken and Stir. Is it government mandated deadline or all or some carriers? And I think we covered that. June is when it's required, and those carriers that can't make June have to file their robo mitigation program plans with the FCC by that date, and they still have to comply with the ITG and do something. Then it says, my provider says, this is question number 2, my provider says they have whitelisted all of the numbers we use for caller ID. Does that protect me? Well, I don't know what that means. It could mean that all their numbers are in an authentication hub somewhere, and that's a good thing for sure, but it's not an end all by any stretch. And as we move into this June timeframe, it's just like, you know, having 25 or 30% of the problem from my perspective.
Yeah, those are authentication hubs, Dean. Are we talking about things like the calltransparency.com that the analytics companies are implementing to, as you put it, whitelist numbers?
Not really, no. So those are different, and you know, so those are databases where you can go and say, here's my numbers, here's who I am, I'm a good guy, I swear I am, right? But it's up to the analytic companies to decide how they're going to use that information. And I don't, you know, and everyone's doing they're all different. They haven't agreed from my perspective. The analytic hubs that I'm talking about are, there are a couple of the analytic companies that are also letting folks who have arrangements with them who are trusted in the ecosystem, Shaken, trusted either on the CA side or PA side, to store numbers in their hubs where their algorithms will ignore some of the decisions they would normally make based upon those relationships. And so it's a little bit different than, there is no whitelist out there. There is no such thing as a whitelist. There's no place you can go and put a phone number and say, don't block me and I'll never get blocked. It doesn't exist.
Right. All right, what's our next question?
What will show up on a subscriber's phone based upon attestation levels, A, B, or C, after June 30th? Nothing different than you're seeing now. Attestation level At the end of the day, the requirement is, in a perfect world, everybody is where they need to be. Every call is signed, and that way they can do traceback on any call, and the ITG can go and run and find all the bad actors and put them out of business. But it doesn't mean anything other than calls will not traverse the ecosystem without a token at some point soon, and happening now.
Dean, what are you hearing about enhanced caller ID?
I think it's super cool. I think it's going to help in a huge way. For those who don't know what it is, it means that when we created the shaken standard that allows for this token to go, they added some other parameters that will let us do other cool things, and one of them is be able to push a logo. So if you're Allstate and you make a phone call to somebody, instead of it saying, Allstate on the phone, it'll be like, the hands, right? And so the logo, and that would be very reassuring to folks, same like the United Health Group logo or some other logo. Less than 1% of the handsets today can display it. Technology exists, it's out there. There are a couple of companies that are early adopters and promoters of it. ROI is, everyone I've talked to, it's about ROI. There just aren't enough handsets out there yet. Next generation, that'll be a different ball game. I think it's exciting and great for our industry. We could do so much with it. You can put business cards. You could do so many different things with it. So it's going to be really cool. It's going to be a game changer.
I think it will be as well. And so I've been hearing that and if you're using enhanced caller ID, that might assist with getting calls through the blocking and labeling process. I think labeling, that makes a whole lot of sense. But on the blocking side, are you hearing anything about that?
Will this impact it?
Will that impact it? Will that impact your likelihood of getting a call through, meaning that it wouldn't be blocked if you're using enhanced caller ID?
It's too early to say. I mean, at this point, all it is, it's like when we first started sending call and name display. I mean, it's just pushing another logo. Is it going to? I think answer rate will increase because individuals will respond to it. But I don't know that it's going to be involved in the decision of whether or not a call is delivered or not. I mean, that's going to be based on whether it's signed and its behaviors, and is it a known? Is this a normal behavior for this number, or this number out of the clear blue just start making all these calls with an ALOC of 8-9 seconds? I mean, those days are over. If you're running a dialer with 9 seconds of ALOC, when we get to June and you want your calls signed, no one is going to sign your calls because they're not going to be able to deliver the calls because the carriers won't accept them. So maybe day one they will, but they're going to find out really fast that it's gonna hurt.
Good sound effect there, Dean.
Yeah.
What's the next question?
Let me see. There's some others came in. So one of them is, how is that handled when you use a dial like 5.9s that might have multiple carriers in place? I guarantee you that 5.9s is absolutely working on this because they're a major public company and everybody is, and I'm sure they've got a plan. And again, they're going to have the same issue that those with premise-based dialers are going to have. You have to manage your phone numbers, and you have to make sure that all the carriers that you're using are going to sign with an A all of your calls, and you have a way of updating those carriers. And again, it's up to the originating carrier. And I think it's unrealistic for any carrier to say, hey, either use our numbers or no numbers. I don't think that's realistic. And I think that we'll see what happens.
We just got one
yes.
that's how does Stir Shake and handle calls originating outside of the USA? And I think that was a question that you and I touched on a little bit earlier.
Yeah, I mean, so there's nothing in the regulation that says because the originator, a business may be outside the United States, can't have their calls attested to. There's nothing that says that in the regulations at all. And again, a lot of U.S.-based companies have call centers outside the United States. I mean, Amazon has call centers outside the U.S. for its internal HR, for example, in multiple countries. And their calls are coming through their cloud, and they're going to get signed. There's no question. AWS is a signer, so they're going to sign the calls. It's just a question of know your customer, know they're authorized to use the number. The C attestation that refers to international gateways it's saying traffic that's unknown that may come through an international gateway, as an example, would carry a C because it has no token.
Yeah, and I think the important part of that is that folks that are located outside of the United States and are generating calls into the United States, they just need to make sure that they've got a solution for that, or that they have a U.S.-based originator for their calls, because I think it will become an issue for those offshore call centers that aren't dealing with this right now, or off-center callers really that aren't dealing with this right now.
Yeah,
all right.
I just want to say their KYC is going to be a little more difficult. So any U.S.-based carrier that's dealing with a company offshore who's saying, hey, this is who we are and this is who owns the company, they're going to have more scrutiny to make sure that the carrier is comfortable that they can, because ITG Group will not be happy if you do not know who your customers or you have the wrong information. It will not be nice to the service provider.
Or more importantly, the information that the ITG is, or the folks that are getting the information that the ITG is putting together are not going to be happy. So this one's interesting, Dean. So as you're calculating ALOC, how is that average length of call calculated? Is it a ring, an answer? What should we aim for with regard to ALOC?
So the carriers. So if I'm sending a call to Comcast or I'm sending a call to AT&T or Verizon, they're looking at the traffic that's hitting them at that point, and they're looking at ALOC from their perspective. So it's not from your dialer's perspective. It's what is actually talk minutes or build minutes average that they're seeing on their network coming in from those circuits. So that's what they're looking at. So it's greater than it's not counting ringing. I mean, you really need over 30 seconds minimum ALOC if you want to survive in the new world. That's what I'm seeing right now. Again, right now they're looking at their brand new shiny toys and these new tools they have, looking at the traffic that they never had before, and that's what they're doing. And maybe when more and more minutes, millions of minutes, tens of millions of minutes come through with shaken traffic, they'll move the bar a little bit. But right now, that's what they're looking at. We're getting pushed back hard.
Yeah. There was a question here about Facebook, and it says, key question, the Facebook ruling. Does this in any way vacate earlier rulings regarding human intervention to define ATDS versus non-ATDS? Just moving a little bit away from stir shaken here, Dean. It's an interesting question. It's an interesting question because I mentioned, the PACE amicus brief that we filed with regard to the patents that existed at the time that the TCPA was enacted. And there's a footnote in the Facebook opinion, I think it's footnote 7, that talks about that a random and sequential number generator could be used to determine the order that numbers in a stored list would be called. And they referenced back to our PACE brief, but we weren't talking about the random and sequential generator doing anything with the stored numbers. It's how those numbers were actually generated. And so I'm not so sure that that's really an issue. This question of human intervention, probably not an issue either. The human intervention element had to do with whether that telephone system was being automatically dialed. And in the new definition post Facebook, the question is, was a random and sequential number generator used to generate the numbers and then either call from those or to store those and call later and then dial those telephone numbers? And so human intervention really came in as a result of who was dialing the telephone numbers. Was it this system that was taking these phone numbers and then automatically dialing those? So I don't know that that's an issue anymore. I know that that's something that a lot of people are discussing right now. It's something that we're looking into. I think based on what that system has to have the ability to do with, and which is doing, using a random and sequential number generator to determine what telephone numbers to call, that it likely becomes a moot issue. But I will tell you that I'm a little bit cautious as we move forward. I think the plaintiff's bar is very creative in prosecuting these TCPA cases, and I think they'll be looking for any loophole at all in the Facebook case as they proceed. So this is one of those areas that, as you're working with your attorneys on what your new compliance program looks like and what your new dialing systems look like, you're going to want to make sure that they really, closely look at those types of issues and make sure at all points that you have a defendable position. And that's really the key. That's what it all comes down to. That as you're dialing, and if you should get any of these inquiries or, God forbid, a complaint with a TCPA class action, that you're able to respond to that because you've already built your defendable position. But it'll be interesting to see where things go from here. I know Dean and I were talking before we got onto this webinar, and what you guys didn't see before we got started is my computer went down right before we got started. So literally, I think I got on a minute before, but as we were trying to get things set up, we were talking about the, congressional members are already coming out and making statements about their concern for robodials and how the Supreme Court has ensured that there'll be more robocalls that are being received. And so it'll be interesting to see if they take any action here. It's my position that they have already acted with the Traceback Act. They implemented lots of safeguards by empowering the FCC to take more action more quickly by implementing the Traceback group so that they know where calls are originating from. You can't hide behind very many curtains anymore and still originate traffic on the telephony lines in the United States. And so you're requiring also, as these carriers are engaging in this know your customer process and allowing traffic to be originated on their phone lines, and the FCC making it very clear that if you're originating bad traffic, that is something that will be actionable. I don't think congressional action is what's required now, and I think we as an industry will have to be very vocal about that. I know that we will be through PACE, but any chance you get. And I really do think that as we move forward, our fights now are probably on the state front. The TCPA does not establish a floor for regulation, or a ceiling for regulation, I should say. The states are quite capable and are allowed, pursuant to the TCPA, to regulate above that, and have been for quite some time. There's already a handful of states that don't care what kind of dialer you're using. If you're calling cell phones, you're required to have consent. And so, make sure that you're aware of those states and that you have proper consent, regardless of what type of dialer you're using when calling into those states. But I'm off my soapbox there now, Dean. Any other questions that have come in, or anything else you want to discuss in the last few minutes that we have?
No, I just did. The whole dialer issue is interesting. I mean, the idea of future capacity seems to be off the table. The question then still begs as to, where do you draw that line? Human intervention was a step, very conservative approach versus click to dial, for example. So let me ask you this, maybe you're not in a position yet and you're still evaluating, but if you had a dialer and you move it into a power mode or one-to-one preview mode, dialing mode, would you think that would meet the requirement based on this ruling at this state?
Well, basically what the Supreme Court said was you need to be initiating these calls using a random or a sequential number generator. And so if a random or a sequential number generator isn't part of that process, none of that should matter anymore.
Okay, and that'll end all the cases that haven't been settled up to this point until the next new state or new ruling somebody else comes out with, or loophole. So
there are a lot of happy defense counsel out there that are looking at their cases and saying, is the only issue that was involved in this case or in this class action whether an automatic telephone dialing system was being used, and not a DNC issue or not a pre-recorded message issue. or other issues of that matter. And then, if the case was brought only because it was only pled as being a violation of the dialer, and which would be consent requirements, that you don't have the proper consent to be using an ATDS to call cell phones, then they can take a look at that. And I think that those are cases that we'll see motions to dismiss or some type of other summary request filed with courts and asking them to get rid of those cases. And, we saw a huge number of cases that were stayed pending the outcome of the Facebook case. So I suspect we'll see courts being very busy entertaining those types of motions to get rid of cases, or at least the counts in cases that are no longer relevant with the new definition of ATDS.
Be dismissed. Yeah. And all those people that settled beforehand are shit out of luck. So.
Yeah, it's been an interesting area for TCPA defense lately, because frequently the cost of legal bills is going to be way more than the settlements that you can get, especially with a one-off settlement. So it's a balancing act that you do. And of course, there was a lot of pressure on plaintiffs to settle cases. I think after the oral arguments that were heard in December for the Facebook case, it seemed the Supreme Court was very in tune with the mental gymnastics that the Duke defense team was requiring them to go through in interpreting the language and the syntax within the definition of ATDS. And so I think after that, we saw plaintiffs' attorneys that were much more willing to have reasonable settlements on the cases, one-off, and rather than settling on a class basis. And it will be interesting to see now how all of this falls out. But I suspect we will see a large number of cases dismissed.
Right.
Yep.
That's good news.
Yep.
That's really good news.
That is the good news. That is the good news. It was it's kind of a ridiculous standard that businesses were required to follow. It's one of those things that wasn't certain. There should be certainty as businesses are trying to comply with the law.
There's another last question that just came in. Could you expand, if you want me to read it? Yeah. Could you expand on some of what are authentication hubs? These service companies, and then they indicated such as Newstar. There are a couple of companies. Our company is one, Newstar is another. There are a bunch that have these authentication hubs. It's important to make sure that use one that I personally believe should be a service provider, an authorized shaken service provider is the one that's populating the database. I think more weight is given to the storage of the numbers than other companies that profess to have something similar but are not authorized shaken service providers. So again, that's the standard. It's a really tough to become an authorized shaken service provider. Takes a long time. When people ask like 5 nines, for example, they're working on it. It takes time. It's a very, very lengthy and arduous process for a carrier to become an authorized shaken service provider. They will get there as everybody else. I would work in that direction would be my recommendation. I'm biased, but that's,
Dean, it's been a pleasure. It's always a pleasure. Thanks for coming on our webinar today. And I look forward to doing another one with you sometime here in the future, maybe next year about this time. We can see how, no pun intended, it all shaked out.
We could talk about absolutely.
There you go. There you go. And I think this presentation will be available on our website shortly after. So probably tomorrow you could look for that, and that would include the slides. That was a question that somebody asked. Thank you for spending the last hour with us. Don't hesitate to reach out to either Dean or I if you have any questions about any of the information that we presented. So have a great day.
Thank you, Michelle.
You're welcome, Dean. Bye.
All right.